Please enjoy to the story Something Sweet Stage 1. Innocent Laughs. Begin. Summary. Lola and Jay have never been friends. Becoming unlikely allies is even asking for too much, especially since Lola considers him a nuisance and Jay believes she only dominates. However, with their senior summer drawing to a close, their urge to catch the attention of their former flames hits a new low. So, when Jay's ex turns out to be Lola's sister, and Lola's happens to be Jay's best friend, they form a pact to help each other out. It doesn't come without a price, though. Something sweet, from both ends. But, when you give something sweet, something equally so is returned. For Jay and Lola, their sweet isn't a gumdrop or a lollipop. It's much, much more. To tamper with love is not an easy feat. Not when it's so easy to fall into a cycle of innocent laughs turned warm hugs turned sweet kisses. 01 Vertical line Beach Bar. Under the sun was the worst restaurant on the beach. Hands down. The decor was outdated, the food was overpriced, and the service was beyond moody. It was hard to find a waiter or waitress, for that matter, who didn't look like they crawled out of their grave earlier that day. But, unfortunately for the restaurant, the staff consisted of one of two types of people: the adult who still lived in their parents' basement, or the teenager who wanted nothing more than to be on the beach itself. For some reason, though, people kept coming. The restaurant manager liked to think it was because of his special chicken taquitos, but they were the least ordered item on the menu. Some staff members liked to think it was because of their bubbly, attractive demeanor, but they were fooling no one. The Hulk had more charisma than them. Though everyone tried to convince themselves that they were the sole reason the restaurant was still running, it was clear who reeled in the customers and managed to keep them coming. Lola Capstan was a gift. The saving grace under the sun was in desperate need of. She had a charm to her, something about her bright smile and sweet aura that made her the restaurant's most valuable asset. Attending to the bar out front all afternoon kept her in contact with the customers, and though she was the only one working the counter, she was the only one needed. Even if the line for drinks was wrapping around the restaurant, no one ever complained. After all, they loved listening to Lola as she served. Her stories and casual talk were just as endearing as she was, and that seemed to alleviate the impatience palpable in the air. And, unlike the rest of the staff, Lola seemed to like what she did, or, at least she made it look like she did. Looking past the abysmal pay and the occasional asshole customers, the job did actually have an upside to it, contrary to what many people believed. Starting her freshman year of high school, and going strong for 3 years after, Lola dated Alex Ramirez, one of the boys on the swim team. Although they weren't the most ideal couple, Alex was as dumb as a stack of bricks and Lola was basically born with 2 left feet. They made it work. The polar opposites did find a few interests to base their relationship off of. And, according to everyone else, they made a good-looking couple. In fact, so good, that, if they had a baby, it would have looked like it was crafted by a Greek god. But, opposites could only maintain the spark for so long. While Alex was off on his conquest for a new love, Lola found herself still pining for him, which was why Under the Sun gave her the perfect job. Located near the center of the beach, it gave her the perfect view of Alex and the lifeguard tower. With all the boys crowded around, it was the holy trinity of attractive guys. Perhaps that was why Lola was such an attraction. Hot guys seemed to subdue her melodramatics. But, with a benefit known as Alex Ramirez came a downfall known as Jay. Can you at least try to making it look like you're not so thirsty for him?" he asked when her eyes flitted to Alex. She glared at him as she plucked the bills out of his hand. He was the only person she knew who she'd never genuinely smiled at. "I'm not thirsty," she snapped. "That's what you think, but you were practically drooling over him." "Was not," she said with a scrunched nose. "Was too." That was Jay in a nutshell: a little confident, a little stubborn, and a whole lot of annoying. If it weren't for his beyond beautiful face, it definitely was crafted by the Greek god that was supposed to do the air magic on Lola's baby, she would buried him alive in the sand a long time ago. Unfortunately, he had the perfect tan and the widest smile ever. His curly hair, blonde and brown and everything in between, looked it was softer than silk. And ABS, he had very, very nice and very, very faint ABS. They were admirable. Lola hated herself for thinking that, but she loved that she knew his weakness. "Courtney," she called out over her shoulder. Little did Jay know that Lola's sister was nowhere near. He hit the deck, slamming his chin against the counter with a deafening crack in the process. Cradling his chin with the palm of his hand, Jay didn't realize Courtney wasn't coming until Lola looked down at him. She was stifling a smile. "Don't toy with my emotions like that," he grunted. "It's rude." "Rude? That's priceless coming from you." "Excuse me." "I'm sorry, Jay, but since when do you have emotions?" He grabbed the drink out of her hand, the contents sloshing over the sides. "Very funny, Capstan. I'm laughing so hard." She winked. "I'm glad I could entertain you," she said as she ushered him aside, and the next customer forward. "Wait, what about my change?" "I'm taking it as a tip to compensate for you irritating me." 02 vertical line mimosa. She was wiping down the bar when Jay approached her. Lola had caught a glimpse of him over the top of the counter as he made his way towards her, and her breath caught. If Alex had been her Adonis, Jay was her Apollo, all sunshine and smiles, laurel leaves and energy. It was a blessing to be approached by Jay at Listen, or he liked to say, and Lola should have been thankful that he was one of the few girls he bothered to talk to according to him, but she wanted to do nothing more than run in the opposite direction. Wherever Jay was, there was always trouble, especially around Lola. Normally, one of three things would happen: someone would get annoyed on a good day, something would be thrown also on a good day, or someone would come in the middle and get hurt. That only happened with Courtney, though. None of three scenarios ever ended well. So when Jay sauntered over in all his godly glory, Lola held a nervous breath. Whatever he had to say was either going to amuse her, or make her feel like she'd lost all her brain cells. "Two mimosas, please," he said, his voice unusually leveled. Lola shot him a quizzical look but, nonetheless, turned around and started with his drinks. She could feel his gaze narrowed in on the small of her back, but it was more contemplative than it was teasing, and that wasn't normal for Jay. The air around him was always filled with some sort of ease, and for the first time, she felt nerves. Not a whole lot, but for Jay, even a sliver was too much. She placed the drinks in front of him and leaned forward. "Who's the lucky lady? She must be really special if she gets you any a drink from you." His gaze met hers, an ephemeral gesture, before returning to the fruit bowl he'd been intently staring at. "Sit down. The drink's for you." "Sorry to tell you, but I'm still working." "You can come to me with the drink offer when I'm on break," she told him, her eyebrows almost hitting her hairline. You can't tell me that when you actually have customers actually ordering something to drink. Now sit." And so she did. After all, he had a point. The sky was murky with clouds, and the more that rolled in, the darker it got. The beach was nearly empty aside for those walking along the shore, their feet following the retreating waves. Everyone was returning to their cars because it was going to start pouring any second, by the looks of it. The wind was already picking up and the water was roaring. "You all right?" she asked, taking a cautious sip of the mimosa. The tank was too bright for a dark day, and the sweet was too settling for the sour mood. After what seemed to be a long pause, a clap of thunder and a shudder of wind later, Jay said, "I miss Courtney." A plastic apple was in his hand, and it started to fold under his fist. His curly hair was windswept and it did well to hide the storm raging in his eyes. It was something Lola had never seen before. Rather, Jay's insecurities were something Lola never imagined he had, and that particular side of him almost unnerved her. He continued, "I thought I was over her, but then I started to see her everywhere. Every party I go to, every store that I go to, I don't even get a break from her here. She's always with you, or in the restaurant, or with my friends, and every time I see her, I feel like I start to want her again. It's just a hunch, but it's there, and it drives me fucking insane." "I'm sorry you're starting to feel that way," Lola whispered awkwardly, with nothing better to say. Jay seemed more open about his relationship with Lola's sister than Courtney even was. Although Lola was fuzzy on the details of the breakup, she knew it was messy. She also knew that someone had walked out of it completely heartbroken, and she was just realizing that it wasn't her sister, contrary to what Courtney made it seem like. "Do you ever feel that way about Alex?" She laughed. "More often than you'd think. But I never got over him. He was always there in the back of my mind, and even now, I still think about him. He goes around flirting with anything that has boobs, and I still sit here like an idiot, wanting the one thing I'll never have again. I know how it feels, and it sucks." Jay chuckled at that. "What a situation," he sighed, his cautious gaze meeting hers again. "Who would have thought we'd find something as dismal as this in common?" Lola sighed softly, her voice almost blown away with the chaotic breeze. "I can't mention you to my sister later today and see what she has to say, if you'd like." "Really?" "Sure. Don't think it's because I like you, because I don't, but you seem like you could use a little closure. And I wouldn't want anyone to go through what you're going through." "Thanks, Lola," he said as the sky suddenly opened up. The first drops of rain ran down the length of Jay's bare arms. He shivered but clasped his hands together, resisting the spray of water. "Hey now, Ellison. Don't think I'm doing this for the hell of it. I want something in return. Can we discuss this inside under the sun?" he asked through chattering teeth. "I'm sort of cold." It was possibly the tamest conversation Jay and Lola had managed to date. Or, it was until Jay started to cross his boundaries like his usual self. "If you promise to get in a good word about with me with your sister today, I will buy you an ice cream sandwich from the Snack Shack. Only if you promise to ask Alex what he thinks of me." "Done, but what do I get as payment?" "Well, what do you want?" "That brownie that you always have during lunch. You know, the one with the white chocolate and marshmallows." "Ask me for my brownie again, and I will drown you." "I'm the lifeguard." "You don't drown the lifeguard. Watch me." 03 vertical line ice cream sandwich. Lola regretted letting Courtney take over for her at the bar because the moment she left, it was flocked with all the lifeguards, Alex included, but Jay excluded. So, while it appeared that Lola's kindness drew in regulars, Courtney's looks dragged in temporary paying lifeguards. Lola didn't even bother to disguise her jealousy. Like any other girl, she wanted hot guys her age surrounding her and ogling her perfect body, not wrinkly old men, bless their souls, who wish their wives had asses like Courtney's. Besides, Lola and her sister didn't look that different. Courtney may have had black hair, while Lola's was blonde, and Courtney may have been taller and skinnier and more exotic, but that was as far as their differences went. Just because Courtney inherited the Indian genes in the family didn't mean she was any better. Obviously, Lola was salty. In fact, she was so salty that even the seawater rushing against her bare legs was dehydrated. But she couldn't outdo the peaceful-looking Jay, who was actually salty about Alex and every other male fucking lifeguard, for that matter, flirting with his example, sunglasses propped on his shirt, face feathered by his unruly curls, and head nearly shoved into his book. It was almost impossible to make out the faint color that was seeping into his cheeks. But Lola was good at doing the almost impossible, and Jay's situation was no exception. He may have annoyed her on a normal day, but on a day when the sun was beating down on her and messing with her head, Lola decided it was her turn to play nuisance. Seeing how into his book he was, Lola almost felt bad to kick sand up in his direction. Nonetheless, he was undeterred. He remained still when she called his name. He didn't even move a muscle when she sat down next to him and flicked his nose. Lola was surprised by how many sides Jay seemed to have, first annoying and confident, then sad and needy, now angry and quiet. He actually had a personality under his, what she thought to be, unwavering mannerism. Maybe Jay was an ogre. He had layers, like an ogre, which has layers like onions. Ogres had layers. Onions had layers. Jay had layers. They were all one of the same thing. "What shoved a stick up your butt?" Lola asked, the tense silence finally becoming too much. Jay slammed his book shut, threw it across half the length of the beach, pressed his head between his knees and screamed. Had it not been inappropriate for the situation, Lola would have laughed because he looked pathetic. Even a little below pathetic, just downright pitiful. "There, there," Lola murmured, her voice laced with a friendly veil of amusement as she rubbed his back. "Let it out, you jealous, anger management needing psycho." His head shot up. "Wait until your sister starts getting all touchy with Alex. We'll see who needs anger management then. God, you're such a girl. I thought I was the dramatic one, but damn, you take the cake." Jay gave her a hard look. "Just look behind you," he said resignedly. Despite her head telling her not to, Lola glanced over her shoulder. And, true to what Jay had said, her sister was getting touchy with her ex. In fact, Courtney was almost on top of the counter, on top of him. Her fingers danced over his palm, her lower lip was captured between her teeth, and her boobs were pressed far too hard against the counter to be humanly comfortable. Any more effort to impress Alex, and Lola was sure her sister would break out into sweat. Maybe she could put all of it into perfume bottles and sell them at one of the beach stores. Fragrance. Desperation. "Let the dramatics begin," Jay said, his lips close to her ear. She swatted him away with a flick of her wrist, and crossed her arms over her chest. Her salt was drying up the Pacific Ocean now. "Is this how jealousy's supposed to feel?" he asked. Lola smirked at him. "Trust me, your level of jealousy is perfectly fine. But, the minute you start feeling jealous when your ex-boyfriend starts talking to other guys is when you should come talk to me. That's when you know you're in too deep and you have issues. God, Lola." He laughed. "You need help." She nudged his shoulder playfully. "Hey, now, don't tease me." It was a slow descent into insanity. He was starting to laugh uncontrollably, and she was quick to join him. He was clutching his stomach, and Lola was leaning against him, her arm braced against his shoulder for support. Eventually the two fell back into the sand, their bodies sweaty from exertion and heat and their lungs cramped from overwhelming contractions. Then, Jay turned towards her, his head propped on his hand propped up on his elbow. His lazy smile and lidded eyes made it difficult to keep her own smile under reins. He wasn't getting one from her. Not yet, at least. "I wish someone would have told me you had a sense of humor earlier. I was in serious need of some smiles." He was making it awfully hard for her to keep hers at bay. "You know what else will make you smile?" she started. "My conversation with Courtney last night. About you." He immediately perked up, even more than before. "What did she say?" "Well, first I asked her what she thought about you, and she told me she missed you. That the days got a little lonely without you always texting her or taking her around. I told her that you missed her too, and she said she wouldn't mind catching up with you sometime later. Matter of fact, she said she was kind of looking forward to talking to you, since the two of you apparently drifted after the breakup. She said that." "Cross my heart. Hope to die. Stick the needle through my eye," Lola said with the straightest face she could manage. Jay got to his feet, dusting away the sand coated on the back of his shorts and legs, and held out a hand to her. She eyed it cautiously until he explained. "I believe I owe you an ice cream sandwich for this, don't I?" Picking up the book along the way, the duo made their way to one of the ice cream stands, casting inconspicuous glances over their shoulders at the bar. "Do you think they notice us walking together?" "One can only hope," Lola muttered dryly. "Though, I don't think Alex is going to be looking past Courtney lusting over him anytime soon." 0 for Vertical Line books. Jay was a man, or child, according to Lola, of his word. When he made a promise, he intended to keep it, no matter how difficult the situation. That was until trying to talk to Alex about Lola came along, which was when Jay felt like giving up even before he started. How was Jay supposed to keep his promise when his friend kept avoiding the question at hand, opting to talk about cats instead? Alex didn't even like cats, he was allergic to them. "Come on, man," Jay complained. "It's a short answer question. If you wanted, I could make multiple choice for you." "There's nothing to say," Alex returned flippantly. "We dated, we broke up, and now we're on different paths." The beach, once again, wasn't very busy. Jay couldn't quite put his finger on it because it wasn't a gloomy day. In fact, it was almost the most beautiful day they'd had all summer, and it was already a month in. Though it was barely 10 in the morning, it wasn't unusual for people to start showing up before. The casual beach walks and early waves were usually an attraction for those with houses nearby. Alex was distracted, his eyes trained on a girl under a polka-dot umbrella. Her eyes were closed, but she didn't look like she'd be very happy if someone disturbed her nap. If Jay hadn't been pestering Alex about Lola, he was sure his friend would have approached her and attempted to strike up a conversation. Either he would have gotten a conversation, or he would have been choked to death by the viper-like girl. But Jay wasn't going to deny that she appeared to have a nice body from where they stood. However, Lola's was much better. At least Lola didn't look like she was possessed by death. So, you don't miss her? Ever? Not really. I mean, whenever I see her around, especially on the beach, I actually stop and think to myself, wow, this girl looks fucking amazing. She looks happy, too. I don't think she really misses me, either. Why do you care so much anyway? Jay took a step back, throwing his hands up in surrender. I've just been hanging out with her a lot over the last 2 weeks. I wanted to make sure all was good between the two of you. Alex turned, almost steely. There was a look in his eyes, not something Jay could necessarily pinpoint, that seemed to promise impending death, preferably by strangulation. You've been talking to Lola? Jay shrugged, but he was more than satisfied. Finally he was getting a response out of Alex, and this time, the proper one. A little. Why? Do you not like that? Nothing from his friend. They were crossing paths with the sleeping girl now. The two hadn't even noticed, being so deep in conversation. When they glanced her way, she was slowly stirring. A guy twice Alex's height and 3 times Jay's width was nudging her shoulder, and he looked at the lifeguards when he felt their stares. It took all of Alex's composure not to turn around and run. Jay, on the other hand, smiled and waved. The couple, he assumed they were a couple, was not impressed. No, it's fine. I just didn't know you two were friends, Alex replied stiffly after a long pause. Hey, we're not really friends. More of acquaintances, but I like talking to her, that's for sure. That's cool, I guess. Just make sure to treat her right, she deserves a good friend. I'll keep that in mind, Jay replied coolly. Alex turned to him then. Also, don't go and tell her I said this. I don't want any complications, got it? Jay pressed his lips together, zipped them up, and threw away the key. Alex rolled his eyes as Jay shot him a thumbs up and went back in the direction they came in. While Alex went to talk to one of the guys posted at the tower several paces down, Jay wandered the shore. He whistled tunes, clicked his feet together, and kicked dirt at people. It was an accident until he was sure Alex had forgotten about him. Or, at least Alex was too busy to be thinking about him. He bounded towards Under the Sun. The bar was, once again, deserted, but Lola managed to busy herself. She was seated on one of the stools behind the counter, and she had a book in hand, the book he'd thrown from the other day. Her hair was pulled up in a sloppy ponytail to keep off the sweat on her neck, and she'd already stripped down to a tank top and shorts. Jay wasn't complaining, though. He had a nice view. Lola didn't look up when he flailed his hands in the air, didn't budge when his heavy-footed run made the ground rumble, didn't look concerned when Jay realized he was running too fast to stop himself before he reached the bar. Lola only moved when he shouted her name as a frantic cry. She ducked out of the way when he approached the counter, hopping onto, sliding over, and toppling into the bottles on the other side. Her eyes were white and her hands were covering her mouth when he got to his feet. Other than being a little disoriented, he was fine. Actually, a concussion was debatable. You belong in a circus, Jay. Would I have been able to talk to Alex if I was in the circus? You talked to him, she shrieked. Jay's hand shot out over her mouth as he cast a glance over his shoulder. She hadn't drawn any attention to them yet. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "And get down. Alex can't see us here." So they sat on the floor, Lola cross-legged and Jay with his knees up to his chest. She was smiling, and it was contagious. Jay found it impossible to keep his down because soon enough, they were just grinning at each other. Lola was willing to accept defeat. It was too hard to not smile at Jay when he was trying to be endearing for once. His charm was much like hers, irresistible. "He says he thinks you look amazing whenever he sees you, and that I should treat you right now that we're friends. But he apparently doesn't miss you. Obviously, that's a lie. When I told him I was talking to you, he looked like he was about to go Godzilla on me, so he clearly still feels protective of you." Lola reached out and touched his hand. Jay's head snapped up, and his eyes met hers. He'd never seen anything warmer in his life. "Thank you. I really, sincerely mean that." Jay shrugged. A few years ago, he came to realize he wasn't very good with responding to sincerity or thank yous, and Lola had managed both of those in 7 words. "So, what do you want in return?" she asked, breaking his trance. He shook his head. "Just keep smiling at me," he told her. "The rumors are right. It really is sweet." 05 vertical line seashells. "Let's make Alex jealous today," Jay said out of the blue. Lola was closing up the bar and she had barely 10 minutes to spare before her shift at Under the Sun started. She shot Jay a dirty look, gestured to all the glasses she had yet to clean, and turned her back to him. This time, when his eyes were on the small of her back, they were only nested there to aggravate her. Lola bristled as he continually clicked his tongue, drugged his fingers against the counter, and hummed under his breath. She could practically feel the smile etched into his face. She tried to focus on the sunset. The hanging lamps lining the boardwalk started to flicker on, but their lights were drowned out by the sun's iridescence. The air was saturated with its glow, and Lola swore she could feel the sparks of heat scratch against her skin. The sky was a bruised maroon and fiery orange and faded pink, and the colors painted the water into a mural of richness. Lola believed that she was lost in nature's beauty when Jay's voice echoed around her. "Better think fast, Lola." She spun around, glass and towel in hand, as he tossed a plastic apple her way. She flinched as she tried to catch it, but like every other athletic endeavor of hers, she failed. She caught the apple, and managed to keep hold of the towel, but of all the things she could drop, it was the glass. It shattered against the wood with a crack, and Jay could have sworn that when Lola looked up at him, even Hades couldn't have managed such menace. "You better start running," she warned, her brown eyes catching the sun's light and glinting the dull crimson. While Jay ran, tripping over his feet as the sand caved under his weight, Lola seemed to float. Her hands were outstretched and she screamed curses at him. Though their dynamic had changed over the last 2 weeks and they were a step above frenemies, their friendship was in a fragile state. Jay wasn't very good with fragility, either. He didn't have a gentle bone in his body. But, perhaps for the situation he was in, it was a good thing. The smoke coming out of Lola's ear was a sight. All eyes were on them, including Alex's. "Why the hell can't you let me work in peace?" she shouted. She threw a towel at him. He caught it effortlessly. "Who the hell cursed me with someone as infuriating as you?" She threw sand at him. He turned his back on her. "What the hell did I do in a previous life to deserve to be haunted by you?" She threw seashells at him. He blocked the impact with his hands and gave her an incredulous look. "Did you just throw seashells at me?" he asked. "Yeah." Jay shook his head. "Now that's just cruel, Lola. Do you know how much getting hit with that shit hurts?" She shook her head. "Then it's time to feel the pain," he told her with a soft laugh. Jay glanced up and caught Alex's gaze just as he tackled Lola. The two toppled over, landing in the water with a loud splash. The waves weren't gentle around them. They crashed over the two and sucked them under over and over again. As Lola would break the surface with a shocked laugh, Jay would pull her back down. It was the same the other way around. Despite the warmth hanging in the air, the water was cold and chilled the two to the bone. Eventually their unrelenting, twisted game of tug-of-war started to slow down until they were sluggishly making their way back to the shore. Lola fell on top of Jay in a heaping pile of exhaustion, but her laughter hadn't stopped. Her chest still shook, and it brought about another round of chuckles until their stomachs were cramped. Jay's arm fell off her shoulder as she rolled onto her back, holding her sides. When he turned his head fractionally, he used all the strength in his body to keep from reaching out and touching her face. She couldn't possibly be real. The shadow cast across her face made her look ethereal. She was more breathtaking than Aphrodite and Hera could have ever been. "You're an idiot," she said finally. "I'm an idiot who knows how to make your ex-boyfriend envious." When Lola arched her back and barely caught sight of Alex, his back was taut and his lips were pulled into a thin line. His gaze was trained on them, and only them. Seeing how invested he appeared to be in whatever Lola was doing, she was sure lifeguarding was the last thing on his mind. She looked at Jay, and Jay looked at her, and the two broke out into another fit of laughter. Victory was a sweet, sweet thing. 06 vertical line crabs. Lola was a very systematic person. She did everything purposefully and methodically. It made trying to hook Courtney and Jay up 20 times easier when she had a plan. And she definitely had one, albeit a little unorthodox. When she asked her sister to take over for her for the morning, Lola could hardly control her excitement. Courtney was already complaining about having to fill in even though it was only 2 times in the span of 2 weeks. As Courtney started setting up, Lola was already in the outskirts of the beach, knee-deep in the water. Many people weren't aware of it, but the beach had a restricted area, far beyond the main attractions. In fact, no one ventured into those locations, not because they knew it was restricted because rebellious teenagers were becoming the new it thing, but because the areas were located in the middle of nowhere. With 3 years of experience working at the beach, Lola knew her way in and out of the restricted areas without being detected. The shoe box in hand, Lola cast a glance over her shoulder. The coast was clear. She ducked her head under the current and reached an arm out. Almost immediately she felt something and slippery moving under her fingertips. The shell, or what she thought was a shell, was hard and rigid. She wrapped her fingers around it and shoved it into the box, shutting it with a lid without as much as a glance. She knew with the way the box jostled in her hands that she had caught what she intended. Ducking under the rope, she made her way back to the mainland. She caught Jay's quizzical look and winked, gesturing towards her box. One look of confusion later, realization dawned. He kicked his sandals off and pulled his shirt over his head. Jay shot Lola a cheeky grin and flexed exaggeratedly. She could barely make out the corded muscles tensing, but Lola liked what she saw. A flexing Jay was an impressive Jay. The two had already gone over the plan the day before, and he knew his cue. It was only a matter of Lola fulfilling her part, scaring the sexy right out of Courtney. Although Courtney loved tanning on the beaches, there was one thing she despised about the location: the crabs. Maybe it was because, when they were younger, Courtney was pinched on her calf by a crab, but ever since then, she was deathly afraid. In fact, the last time she saw a crab, she locked herself in her car and stayed put for over 3 hours, knees tucked under her chin. Lola didn't miss the exasperated look her sister gave her when she approached. "Did you ask me to fill in for you so you could relax?" she snapped. Lola laughed at her. "I had a few errands to run," she told her, pointing the box now on the counter. Courtney peered at it with pressing eyes. "Yeah? What's in it?" The box was motionless, for once. "You really want to see what's inside?" Courtney nodded. Obliging. Lola started to open the shoe box but accidentally lost her grip and tipped it forward. The box surged towards her sister, who stepped out of the way and allowed it to land on the ground. With the lid popping right off, the crab was free to crawl around the bar in search of an opening. Lola could have sworn she'd never seen her sister failure in her life. Courtney shrieked, her arms flailing in the air as she ran in circles. Although the crab wasn't necessarily following her, it seemed like it was in her way anywhere she tried to run. Though, that wasn't saying much considering how tiny the bar space actually was. Lola looked over her shoulder to see Jay already bounding towards them. He would have walked through fire and sacrificed his firstborn child to save a distressed Courtney. On the other hand, if it was a distressed Lola, he would have brought out a deck chair and popcorn to enjoy the show. Although the friendship could be taken into consideration, Lola knew that, between the two of them, if either one went up in flames, the other would be hardly bothered. Jay's heroics were cut short, however, when he attempted to jump over the counter. Courtney's arms were still swinging around, and she managed to clip him in the jaw right as he landed. With a shout, he fell over, landing square on his ass. Courtney covered her mouth, momentarily forgetting the crab, and knelt down in front of him. Lola peered over at them. Courtney had Jay pulled up into her lap and she was rubbing his chin gently, while pushing the hair out of his eyes. Jay's eyes twinkled. Lola cooed out loud. 2 pairs of eyes glared at her. "What?" she asked, throwing her hands up. "This is cute. This is the part where you guys kiss." "You need to calm down," Courtney muttered, but her attention was back to an injured Jay. "My work here is done, then," Lola said. She collected her crab, now named Spartacus, and went on her merry way. 07 vertical line bikinis. Lola found Jay rummaging through her beach bag when she returned from her lunch break. She would have found his deer-in-the-headlights expression adorable had her bikini top not been in his hand. It was part of the reason why she had returned to the bar. Lola wanted to go for a swim with some of the girls from Under the Sun Day, and one thing about Lola was that she hated when people touched her belongings without her permission, especially the only bikini she owned. She had 2 reasons. First, she hated getting her clothes wet and having to do the laundry. She liked to wear the same thing several times in a row. Kind of like a teenage guy, Lola had a philosophy that if it didn't smell or have any stains on it, it was fit to be worn until it did. Something about wearing a wet t-shirt and shorts for the rest of the day irked her. And the salt, sand, and seaweed that bunched up in the most unexpected places made doing the laundry a pain. She had a knack for clogging up the washing machine. Second, Lola was cheap. She was cheaper than Mr. Krabs himself. She didn't like buying things, even out of complete necessity. If she was hungry, she made energy bars last the entire day, no matter how disgusting they tasted. If she was thirsty, Lola became very sparse with her water. She even made herself a free drink on the occasion, but only when no one was looking. If she wanted to go for a swim, she wore the only bikini she owned, no matter how ratty and old it was. The red, polka-dotted pieces of fabric were her two most prized possessions, and she would kill anyone who tried to take them from her. If she could have, Lola would have drowned Jay with tequila. In fact, she grabbed the tequila bottle off the shelf and pointed it at him. "Put the bikini top down, and no one gets hurt." Jay complied quickly because he knew Lola more than the girl herself. He knew her dramatics. He knew that if Lola threatened something, she wouldn't be afraid to go through with it. If the threat was cracking the glass bottle over his head, he knew who was going to be backing down, and it was never her. With the flick of her wrist, Jay moved aside and let her examine her bag. Everything was in place except one item: her bikini bottom. It was why Jay had bothered to return to the bar in the first place. He realized he had picked up only one part of her bikini when he arrived at the lifeguard tower. He knew a return for the second half was risky, but it was a risk he was willing to take. After all, facing Lola's wrath over a bikini was better than her wrath over him not doing his end of the deal, getting her a conversation with Alex. "Where is it?" she asked, hands braced on her hips. He knew what she was talking about. "I don't know." The bottle was pointed at him again. "I have tequila, and I'm not afraid to use it." That was the story of how Jay found himself being pushed around by the, allegedly, sweetest girl alive. A hand braced on the small of his back. Lola bristled as she saw where Jay was taking her. The tower, despite the rushing lunch hour, was packed with guys. Shirtless guys, for that matter. As they approached, curious eyes fell on Lola. Some were amused while others were hungry. She was fresh meat to them. She found herself taking a swig of tequila at the thought. Lifeguards filtered out of the way as Jay and Lola made their way up the stairs, but just to be safe, Jay took hold of her hand and pulled her closer to him. Lola, surprisingly, didn't try to pull away from him. She seemed to shift closer on her own, tequila bottle pressed hard against his lower back. For some reason, Jay found the need to stake his claim on Lola, despite her wanting to belong to Alex. In a jungle like the lifeguard tower, it was easy for priorities to get mixed up. Jay had seen enough of the guys lose their girlfriends amongst the rest of the animals, and the girls never returned to them again. He felt like, by making Lola his, he was saving the others from perpetual condemnation. He could only imagine what it would be like to be stuck with a drama queen. Jay remembered food science and how Lola had made her partner cry because she'd added too much salt to their soft pretzels. If she threw a tantrum for something as small as under-seasoned pretzels, he tried to imagine how she'd behave if her boyfriend forgot an anniversary. Or worse, her birthday. He shuddered. The drama queen and high maintenance. She was the ultimate package deal. Jay pointed to one of the duffel bags at the corner of the tower. Lola could immediately make out her polka dots, which heavily contrasted the black of the bag. She shoved her bottle into Jay's hands, the terrible decision she later realized, and made her way across the room. The boys lounging on the deck hooted, but she ignored them. She didn't, however, ignore the death stare Jay sent their way. It almost made her smile. Almost. Her hand was inside the front flap of the bag and her fingers were fisted around the material when a voice echoed amidst the hushed whispers. "Lola, is that you?" Stupidly, she let go of her bikini bottom as she spun around, coming face to face with a confused Alex. He glanced over her shoulder, and eyed her skeptically. "Were you looking through my bag?" The heart beat past. 2, 3. Then, "Jay!" Lola shrieked, but he was nowhere to be found. The jerk had left her in the animal's den to suffer the humiliation, not really, of being caught by the king of the jungle. 08 vertical line shade. "He's such a sleaze. What do you even like about him?" Lola gaped at him. "You're asking me? You've been his best friend for God knows how long. It's easy for me to be his friend. I'm not the one who is to watch him continuously flirt with other girls even after I've made it blatantly obvious that I like him. It's your job to be a damsel in distress." She huffed. "Well, the stunt you pulled the other day by putting my bikini with his stuff didn't help my case. I looked even more desperate than I am." "Ha ha!" Jay shouted, jumping from his seat. Lola also jumped, but for completely different reasons. "So you are desperate to date him again?" Lola glared. But she only tried to wish Jay to help because he was right. She was beginning to yearn for Alex more than ever. Not missing him during the school year was easy. She hardly ever saw him. Seeing him at the beach, however, was a whole new ballgame. She hated the way her heart slammed against the reed cage, and how she felt like she could never breathe, and how her nostrils always flared when he flashed his cheeky grin to anyone but her. She tried to ignore the way that, whenever she was on break, she would daydream about him when she was on a break. She would imagine that they were the only two on the beach. Alex would be forced to talk to her. And her dream started out like every cheesy, romantic novel she had ever read. They would strike up a conversation. They would go on a date. And a few hours later, they would kiss and declare it love. If she was lucky, she sometimes even got to dream about Alex taking her on the counter. Jay had to almost smack the blush off her face when it started to rise in her cheeks. "You have a terrible taste in guys, I swear. I mean, if Alex was an actor and was nominated for an Oscar, and won, he wouldn't even have to show up. They could give it to a literal piece of shit in a toilet and call it Alex Ramirez from that day on. Christ, why are you hating on him so much? I just don't like the way he's treating you. You, of all people, don't deserve that." Jay didn't want to smack the blush that creaked into her cheeks then. In fact, he found the way she tried to hide her face behind a curtain of hair very cute. "Your taste in girls isn't much better. I mean, of all people, you pick Courtney. What's wrong with your sister? Are you kidding? She always has 7 guys on her radar and usually dates, like, 3 guys at the same time. Even all the guys she'd broken up with wouldn't have enough middle fingers to show her for being so flaky." "Ouch." Jay flinched. Lola sighed. "Can we go get this ice cream?" "Why? Throwing around all this shade is making me hungry. Let's go stand in the shade instead, and have something vanilla, please." Jay smiled softly. "I like the sound of that. I need something sweet." It was odd walking to the ice cream truck. They had their arms tucked around each other's waists, like they were best friends. Or, perhaps in the future, even more than that. 09 vertical line lemonade. Lola had to admit, Jay was actually doing a really good job of trying to hook her up with Alex. His ideas were unconventional. They were also occasionally painful and always irritating. But they got the job done. As the days went by, she found it hard not to watch Jay walk around the beach whenever he showed up in her peripheral vision. There was something about the way he was always talking to Alex that made her smile. Whatever they talked about didn't seem like the best friend kind of conversation. It was more of a "I know a girl who you should really consider." Jay was always animatedly flapping his hands in the air and rolling his eyes. Lola would know because she'd seen him do both of those things enough times. She was starting to believe that if he continued, he'd eventually grow a pair of wings and fly away, his eyes rolled into the back of his head forever. She couldn't say she would mind it though. She would finally be free of his nuisances. But with the loss of one problem came another to compensate: the lack of an accomplice. Lola really needed a partner in crime if she was going to end the summer with a boyfriend. She didn't hear Jay approach the counter until he was drumming his knuckles against the counter, and whistling a soothing seaside tune. Lola spun around and handed him a bottle of water, which he took gracefully. He'd actually taken a week off from lifeguarding as a part of his yearly vacation. He was spending a surprising amount of that vacation hanging out with Lola at the bar. She wasn't necessarily complaining though. Jay could be good company when he wanted to. In fact, Lola was beginning to think that if she spent another week with Jay, she would grow a set of ABS from all the laughing she did. The shock to her, but not to many others, was that Jay was the ultimate comedian. It seemed like he was most at ease when he was making others laugh. Lola, especially. The air around him changed when he talked to her. He was always happier and peppier, if that was possible. Jay seemed to put his best foot forward when he was around Lola because for some odd reason, he found the need to make her laugh. The sweetness of it was kind of like a drug. The more he heard the laugh, the more he wanted to hear it when it was gone. He was also making himself useful at the bar. With all the visiting he was doing, Under the Sun's manager demanded that Jay do some work, or he wouldn't get to show up as much. So, while Lola was trying to help him get the hang of making the basic drinks, he told her stories. They were all wonderful stories, tales of their adventures together as kids. "Do you want me to tell you the Barbie doll story? Is it going to embarrass me? Should you even be asking that question anymore? Am I going to want to die?" "Always." Lola sighed. "Then go for it." We were in 4th grade at the time. It was the first time I came to your house, and it was because your parents invited us. Our dads were great friends in college. Anyway, we had never actually met until then. We didn't go to the same school. Your parents sent us upstairs to play with your toys. We went, but your room looked like it had gotten stampeded by the zoo. Your Barbie dolls, especially, were..." Lola choked. "This doesn't end well, does it?" Jay chuckled. "I sat down, and then you screamed. You screamed so loud that both our parents came running upstairs. You started sobbing because I'd accidentally sat on your doll, Margot, and ruined her hair. After that, you demanded that I leave your house. Your parents let us stay for dinner. You were so angry that you didn't even sit with us at the dinner table. You said you didn't want to eat in the same room as a murderer." Awesome 4th grade vocabulary, by the way. "I'm a terrible person." Apparently I had permanently deformed Margot's face. Jay paused and looked at the glass of lemonade he'd managed to make. It didn't look like it was going to poison him if he tried to drink it, but he decided to take precautions. With a wide smile, He handed the glass to Lola for tasting. As she took an unknowing swig, a voice rang out behind them. "Hey, Jay." "Lola," it greeted. The duo spun around. Alex was standing at the counter, shirtless and smiling and soaking wet. Jay grinned. Lola meant to spit out her drink because it was disgusting. Seeing Alex only added to the effect. However, she didn't meant to spit it all over him. "Oh my God!" she screamed. Alex made a face. "I think I'll just come back later." Jay didn't bother to sympathize for Lola when she cried out for Alex. He was too busy laughing at her to care. 10 vertical line blankets. "You and Courtney talked last night." Jay wasn't the only one holding up his end of the bargain. Lola wasn't doing a half-bad job herself. He grinned. "We did." "How'd it go?" She wasn't doing a good job of hiding the eagerness in her voice. There was a part of her that was ecstatic about Jay and her sister getting back together. Their kind of relationship was something she'd yearned for, and never got, with Alex. Alex's world revolved around swim, and dragging Lola to parties she didn't want to go to. Most of the parties she was forced to attend were to celebrate Alex's achievements, and despite being his girlfriend, she was always cast aside. Lola couldn't remember even one party where she had deliberately congratulated Alex in public. People were always swooning over him more than she ever did. And, when she thought about it, her relationship with Alex was always based on what he wanted. They went to his favorite restaurants, his favorite stores, his favorite hangouts. The only thing they had in common was that they both enjoyed hanging out at Lola's house. Lola was starting to suspect that Alex had enjoyed it more because of Courtney than her. Jay's relationship was different, though. He knew how to treat the girl like she was the only one in the world for him. Lola knew the way Jay always looked at her sister, and how he always went out of his way to make sure she was happy. That was all Lola wanted, really, for someone to look at her the way Jay looked at the love of his life. Lola could almost swear that Jay's pupils would turn into hearts and his tongue would hang out of his mouth like he was a panting dog. Courtney's relationship was yet another thing that Lola could add to her long list of envies. Her sister was always going to have a love Lola believed she would never get. Sometimes, it made her think she was unlovable. That's why while a part of her was happy for Jay and Courtney, another part, a much bigger part, was tempted to ruin their relationship. For a moment, she was tempted to back out of her end of the bargain. If she couldn't have a good relationship with anyone, she didn't want her sister having one either. It was selfish and cruel, and it made Lola feel ashamed. For a second, Lola thought she was a monster. To want what she wanted was a desire only a true monster would have. Perhaps under her sweet demeanor lay a demon, perhaps that was who she really was. Maybe that explained why no one loved her the way she wanted to be loved. No one wants to fall for the devil. Jay hesitated. It was interesting, to say the least. She's changed a lot and I can't figure out if it's a good or a bad one. Lola's heart fluttered. That idea that Jay may be losing interest in Courtney gave her a twisted feeling of success. "Do you think you'd still love her if it was a bad change?" she asked, tentatively. A note. "I don't think I'd fall out of love without experiencing the change first." They were sitting on a blanket in front of the bar. Having memorized Lola's break times, Jay had brought out a blanket for them to sit on as they caught up. He'd started lifeguarding again, so he didn't show up quite as much as he did. He found that, in the time he spent away from the bar, he was always thinking about the next chance he'd get to visit it. Jay knew for a fact that it wasn't his phenomenal lemonade that kept him returning by the hour. "You really are a good guy, aren't you, Ellison? Took you long enough to figure it out, Capstan," he returned. She turned her head, tilting her chin up until her gaze was leveled with his. She starting to believe that the mischievous kink in his smile wasn't that mischievous after all. Every aspect of Jay was starting to become just as genuine as he was, and Lola was welcoming the change. It was a good one. "How did I ever hate you?" he laughed. "I feel like we're having a moment right now, and if I tell you that story, it's going to ruin everything. Let's save that question for another day, and keep the compliments coming." Lola rolled her eyes. "Don't push your luck, buddy." For once, Jay listened to her. He fell silent, but he was still looking at her. Before Lola could say anything, he had turned towards and was leaning in. She didn't protest when he pulled her close, though. Contrary to what she thought, she enjoyed being wrapped in his arms. It was a warm embrace, and a safe one, too. It had been a long time since she'd felt that way. In that moment, if she had the choice to stay in his arms forever, she would have. "What was that?" she asked when he pulled away. "I'm not sure actually. I just felt like hugging you." He paused. "As a thank you for getting me that phone call." "That was sweet." "Really?" He looked nervous. Lola would have never guessed that he would get nervous over something so small. She nodded. "Really? Stage 1 vertical line complete. From the moment we shared our first laugh together, I knew I wanted you around. Today, tomorrow, maybe even forever. I want you around the day after forever, too. I just want you."